He looked at me, smirked, and tossed the new contract across the table. Don't like it, then leave. This is how the economy works. I signed it. 1 month later, I owned his entire company. And him? He works for me now. The thing about power is that people who abuse it never see the reversal coming. They're too busy counting their wins to notice they're teaching their victims exactly how to play the game better than they ever could. My name is Emily Carter, and for 6 years, I was the CFO who saved Grayson and Holt from bankruptcy. Not that you'd know it from the way Mark Grayson looked at me that morning in his corner office, the Austin skyline gleaming behind him like a promise he'd never keep. Emily, we need to talk about restructuring, he said, not bothering to look up from his MacBook. The same MacBook I'd approved the purchase of when we were hemorrhaging cash during COVID. The same desk I'd sat across from when I'd presented the financial strategy that kept us alive. I'd been at Grayson and Holt since 2018, recruited from Deloitte to transform their chaotic finances into something investors could trust. Enterprise software solutions for mid-market companies, not sexy, but profitable when done right. I'd turned their burn rate from a bonfire into a controlled flame, secured 3 rounds of funding, and navigated us through the pandemic when half our competitors folded. Mark Grayson, our 45-year-old CEO and co-founder, had once called me his secret weapon at company all hands. That was before his disastrous pivot into AI solutions, a venture that burned through $12 million in 8 months with nothing to show for it but some half-baked algorithms and a team of overpaid engineers who'd since jumped ship to Meta and Google. The board is demanding cuts, Mark continued, finally gracing me with eye contact. His expression was that practice startup founder stoicism, the kind they teach at TechCrunch Disrupt. We need to show fiscal responsibility. I knew what was coming. I'd seen the signs, the closed-door meetings I wasn't invited to, the sudden interest in consultant CFOs, the way Mark's assistant Karen had started avoiding eye contact in the break room. How much? I asked, keeping my voice steady. 60% salary reduction, effective immediately. The number hung in the air like a bad smell. 60%. After I'd worked 80-hour weeks to keep this company breathing, after I'd passed up offers from Amazon and Dell to stay loyal to a vision I'd helped build. But, Mark added, leaning back in his Herman Miller chair, another purchase I'd approved in better times. We need you to stay. You know this company better than anyone. We can't afford to lose your expertise during the transition. Translation: we need you to clean up my mess for poverty wages while I figure out how to cash out. The company needs you, Emily. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good. Theodore, I stared at him. This man who'd given himself a 20% raise last quarter while preaching austerity to everyone else. This man who drove a new Model S Plaid while asking his employees to share the pain. He slid the amended contract across his glass desk. I need an answer by end of day. I picked up the papers, feeling their weight. 6 years reduced to a number, and that number reduced by more than half. This wasn't restructuring. This was humiliation dressed up as fiscal responsibility. But I smiled. Because Mark Grayson had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He just didn't know it yet. I signed the contract at 4:47 p.m. that same day. Mark's assistant Karen watched me with something between pity and relief as I handed her the papers. She knew she'd be next if she showed any solidarity. Smart choice, Mark said when Karen brought him the signed documents. He didn't even look up from his phone. I knew you'd see reason. You've always been practical, Emily. It's what I like about you. Practical. The word tasted like ash. I'd been practical when I'd structured our debt to keep us afloat. Practical when I'd negotiated payment terms with vendors who wanted to drop us. Practical when I'd convinced investors to give us one more chance. And this was my reward, a 60% pay cut and a pat on the head. The next morning, Mark posted on LinkedIn. I saw it while drinking my coffee in my one-bedroom apartment, the same apartment I'd been planning to upgrade before yesterday's meeting. Proud to announce that Grayson and Holt's leadership team has voluntarily agreed to significant compensation adjustments as we navigate current market conditions. True leaders make sacrifices. That's how we build resilient companies. Leadership, startup life, tough decisions. Voluntarily. The comments poured in, other CEOs congratulating him on his brave leadership, venture capitalists applauding his fiscal discipline. One particular comment made me set down my mug. This is why Mark Grayson is one of Austin's most promising founders. He does what needs to be done. I screenshotted everything. At the office, the atmosphere was funeral quiet. Word had spread. 2 senior engineers had already given notice. Our head of sales was taking calls in the parking lot, probably interviews. But Mark seemed oblivious, strutting around in his new Brunello Cucinelli sneakers, talking about exciting pivots and lean operations. That's when I found the first breadcrumb. I was reviewing Q4 projections when I noticed unusual activity in our corporate development folder. Documents I should have been copied on but wasn't. Legal memos about strategic alternatives. Valuation models that painted our company in the worst possible light. Investment banker engagement letters dated 2 weeks before my salary cut. Mark wasn't restructuring. He was shopping the company. I dug deeper that night, using my CFO access before they thought to revoke it. What I found made my stomach turn. Mark had been in talks with 3 potential buyers, deliberately tanking our metrics to justify a fire sale price. The AI disaster? Not a miscalculation, a calculated move to depress valuations. My salary cut? Part of a broader cost reduction story to make the company look desperate. But here's what made me smile. Mark was sloppy. In his rush to cash out, he'd left trails everywhere. Offshore accounts holding company funds. Side deals with vendors that lined his pockets. Executive bonuses paid out while claiming losses. The kind of financial creativity that makes lawyers salivate and board members call emergency meetings. I printed everything, at home, not at the office. 3 copies, 1 for my lawyer, 1 for my safe, 1 for insurance. The final insult came that Friday. Mark called an all-hands meeting, standing before our depleted team with fake concern. "I know these have been challenging times," he began. "But I want you to know that your leadership team is exploring every option to secure our future. We're in discussions with potential partners who share our vision." Partners, not buyers. As if we were too stupid to read between the lines. "Some of you might be worried about your positions," he continued. "I can't make promises, but I believe our best days are ahead." I watched my colleagues' faces, good people who'd trusted this company, who'd turned down other offers to build something here. They deserved better than being sold off like furniture in a liquidation sale. That night, I made a decision. Mark Grayson thought he'd pushed me into a corner. Thought a 60% pay cut would keep me grateful and quiet while he orchestrated his exit. He thought I was just another employee to squeeze dry and discard. He was wrong. I wasn't just practical. I was patient. And I had access to everything I needed to return the favor. I opened my laptop and typed a name into my encrypted email, Lucas Brennan. Subject line: Investment opportunity we discussed last year. Now, very interesting. It was time to stop being practical. It was time to be strategic. Lucas Brennan responded within an hour. "Emily, I was wondering when you'd reach out. Coffee tomorrow? The usual place?" The usual place was Cosmic Coffee on South Congress. Far enough from downtown that we wouldn't run into anyone from Austin's incestuous tech scene. Lucas had been circling Grayson and Holt for 2 years, ever since I turned down his acquisition offer at a conference in 2022. Back then, Mark had sworn we'd never sell. "We're building a legacy," he'd said. Legacy? Another word that had aged poorly. "I heard about your situation," Lucas said, sliding into the booth across from me. He was everything Mark pretended to be, actually wealthy, genuinely connected, and smart enough not to broadcast it on social media. 60% is insulting. "It's strategic," I corrected, pulling out my laptop. "Mark's trying to make the company look distressed. He's already in talks with Apex Partners, Silverton Capital, and probably NetSuite. He wants a quick exit at a depressed valuation, maybe $40 million tops. Lucas whistled low. For a company that did $23 million in ARR last year? Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. I showed him my screenshots, the evidence I'd gathered. Mark's been cooking the books, not illegally, just creatively, hiding revenue, inflating costs, accelerating depreciation. The real value is closer to $75 million, maybe $80 million with the right leadership. And you have proof? I have everything. 6 years of financial intelligence, every contract, every liability, every skeleton in the corporate closet. I leaned forward. But I don't want to be a whistleblower. Lucas, I want to be an owner. That got his attention. Lucas ran Brennan Capital, a private equity firm that specialized in distressed acquisitions. But more importantly, he understood revenge served cold. What are you proposing? We create a shell company, Anonymous LLC, registered in Delaware. You front the capital. I provide the intelligence and run the operation. We buy Grayson and Holt at Mark's fire sale price, then I turn it around. You get your return, I get my company. And Mark? Mark gets exactly what he's asking for, a quick exit at a terrible valuation. Lucas studied me over his cortado. You know this is dangerous. If Mark finds out. He won't. Mark's fatal flaw is that he underestimates everyone around him. To him, I'm just the CFO who couldn't even negotiate her own salary. The last person he'd expect to orchestrate a hostile takeover. We spent the next 3 hours mapping out the plan. Lucas would set up Apex Acquisition Holdings LLC, purposely similar enough to Apex Partners to create confusion but legally distinct. I'd feed him inside information on Mark's negotiations, allowing us to undercut other bidders at exactly the right moment, but I needed more ammunition. That night, I reached out to my network, former employees Mark had screwed over, vendors he'd slow-paid, investors he'd misled. The stories poured in. Sarah from product management, forced out while pregnant. James from engineering, promised equity that never materialized. Vendor after vendor with similar tales of delayed payments and broken promises. I compiled it all into a shadow due diligence report, the kind that makes buyers nervous and sellers desperate. The next week, I played my role perfectly. In meetings, I looked appropriately defeated, even grateful for still having a job. I volunteered to prepare materials for potential buyers, giving me legitimate access to everything. Mark, convinced of my submission, gave me more responsibility in the sale process. Emily, I need you to make our numbers look realistic, he said during one preparation session. You understand? I understood perfectly. He wanted me to help tank our own valuation. Of course, Mark. Whatever helps the transition. Meanwhile, Lucas assembled our war chest. 2 other investors joined our consortium, former founders who'd been burned in similar situations. We raised $30 million in commitments, enough to make a serious offer. The beautiful irony? Some of our funding came from limited partners in the very VC funds Mark was courting. They were betting against their own general partners, knowing we had the inside track. By week 3, I had everything. Mark's personal financial troubles that made him desperate to sell, the real company valuation, the other buyers' offer ranges, even the side letter he'd negotiated for his personal payout. I forwarded it all to Lucas with a simple note. Time to make our move. He's desperate enough to take $28 million, offer $25 million cash. Quick close, he'll bite. The trap was set. All we needed now was for Mark to walk into it. The offer came on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to Mark's office. I watched from my desk as he signed for the envelope, his face cycling through confusion, interest, and then barely contained excitement. Apex Acquisition Holdings, LLC was offering $25 million cash for 100% equity in Grayson and Holt, with a 15-day close. Emily, can you come in here? Mark's voice had that fake calm that meant he was vibrating with adrenaline. I found him pacing behind his desk, the offer letter spread across his keyboard. What do you make of this? I pretended to study it carefully, though I'd reviewed every word the night before. It's low. But the terms are clean, no earnout, no escrow beyond standard reps and warranties. They clearly want to move fast. Apex Partners said they were still 2 weeks from making an offer. Mark muttered, more to himself than to me. This must be a different Apex? Could be a subsidiary, I suggested innocently. Private equity firms often use different entities for different deals. The question is whether you want to negotiate or take the bird in hand. Mark's phone buzzed. I glimpsed the text. His divorce attorney. I knew from the documents I'd seen that he needed liquidity fast. His soon-to-be ex-wife's lawyers had frozen more assets than he'd anticipated. Set up due diligence immediately, he ordered. Full virtual data room. If they want to move fast, we'll move fast. I suppressed a smile. I'll handle everything. The next week was a masterclass in controlled deception. As CFO, I was responsible for populating the data room with financial documents. Lucas's team, posing as Apex's analysts, submitted requests for information. I'd answer my own questions, creating a perfect feedback loop that gave us every advantage. Meanwhile, Mark grew increasingly desperate. Silverton Capital had pulled out, concerned about customer concentration risk, a concern I may have accidentally highlighted in our materials. Apex Partners requested another month for diligence, time Mark didn't have. These Apex acquisition people are our best shot, Mark confided during one late evening. We were alone in the office, reviewing contracts. Between you and me, Emily, I need this deal to close. Personal reasons? I asked, feigning concern. He nodded tightly. The divorce, some investments that went south, I'm over-leveraged. But don't worry. Your job is safe with the new owners. I've made that a condition. My job? As if that was my primary concern. As if I hadn't spent 3 weeks orchestrating his downfall while he thought I was protecting his interests. The final negotiations happened over a weekend. Lucas played the role of tough negotiator perfectly, using every piece of intelligence I'd fed him. When Mark pushed back on price, Lucas would casually mention specific liabilities that weren't in the public documents. When Mark tried to maintain some control post-sale, Lucas cited governance concerns that only an insider would know. By Sunday night, Mark had agreed to $24 million, $1 million less than the original offer. They're brutal, Mark said, calling me to review the final terms. But I don't have a choice. Can you look this over one more time? I spent an hour on the phone with him, walking through each provision, the non-compete that would keep him from starting anything similar for 5 years. The immediate resignation from all positions, the cooperation clause for transition, all standard, I assured him, all necessary for a clean break. At least it's over. He sighed at the end. I can walk away with something. That's more than most founders get these days. You're doing the right thing, I told him. Sometimes you have to know when to let go. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd forced me to take a 60% pay cut to demonstrate my loyalty while he planned his exit. Now he was signing away his company for less than a third of its value because he'd tried to game the system. Wednesday morning, the wire transfer was confirmed. $24 million from Apex Acquisition Holdings LLC to Mark Grayson and his co-founders. The papers were signed, the deal was done. Mark announced it at an all-hands that afternoon, trying to spin it as a victory. This acquisition ensures Grayson and Holt's future, he proclaimed. Apex has the resources to take us to the next level. I stood in the back, watching my colleagues process the news. They had no idea their new owner was standing among them, that their CFO with the slashed salary had just bought their entire company, but they'd find out soon enough. The transition period was supposed to last 2 weeks. Mark had negotiated to stay on as a consultant during the handover, still clinging to the illusion of control. He spent those days walking around the office like a ghost at his own funeral, offering unsolicited advice about maintaining the culture and preserving the vision. I maintained my performance flawlessly. Every morning, I arrived early, reviewed the transition documents, and prepared briefings for the new ownership team. Mark even complimented my professionalism. "You're handling this well, Emily," he said one afternoon, finding me in the break room. "I know the salary situation has been tough, but the new owners seem impressed with you. I put in a good word." "I appreciate that, Mark." I stirred my coffee slowly, savoring the moment. Change can be difficult, but I'm optimistic about the future. The reveal was scheduled for Monday morning, exactly 1 month after Mark had cut my salary. Lucas and I had choreographed every detail. The night before, I barely slept, running through scenarios, imagining Mark's face when he realized what had happened. At 8:45 a.m., I was in the boardroom, arranging papers. Mark walked in at 8:55, checking his phone, oblivious. Other executives filed in, the VP of sales, the head of engineering, the HR director who'd processed my pay cut without blinking. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Lucas entered with 2 other members of our investment team. Mark stood, extending his hand with his practiced founder smile. "Gentlemen, welcome to Grayson & Holt. I'm sure we'll—" "Actually, Mark," Lucas interrupted smoothly. "I'd like to introduce you to our managing partner." He gestured to the boardroom door. I stood, walked to the head of the table, and turned to face the room. "Good morning, everyone." The silence was absolute. Mark's hand was still extended, frozen in mid-handshake. His face went through a spectacular range of emotions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, a dawning horror. "What is this?" His voice cracked slightly. "This is a board meeting," I said calmly, taking my seat at the head of the table. As the new majority owner and CEO of Grayson & Holt, I thought we should discuss the transition. This is impossible. You're the CFO. You work for me." "Worked," I corrected. Past tense. As of 9 a.m. this morning, my role has changed. "Lucas, would you like to explain the structure?" Lucas opened his portfolio with theatrical precision. Apex Acquisition Holdings LLC is a Delaware company, with Emily Carter as the controlling shareholder. The acquisition was completed last week, as you know. All contracts have been executed, all funds transferred. Mark sank into his chair. You were Apex?" "I was Apex, I am Apex, and now I'm your former employer." I opened my own folder, pulling out a single sheet of paper. "Which brings us to our first order of business, your transition agreement." The HR director finally found her voice. "Emily, I don't understand. How is this legal?" "Completely legal," Lucas assured her. "All disclosed, all above board." Emily used publicly available information and her own capital relationships to structure a legitimate acquisition. Nothing she did violated her employment agreement or fiduciary duties. I watched Mark process this. Could see him mentally reviewing every document he'd signed, every conversation we'd had. The beautiful truth was that I'd never lied to him. I'd simply let him assume what he wanted to assume. "You played me." His voice was flat, defeated. "I learned from the best," I replied. "You taught me that business isn't personal, remember? That this is just how the economy works. I took your lessons to heart." The room was electric with tension. The other executives were recalculating their positions, wondering if they were next. I let them wonder for a moment before continuing. "Now, let's discuss the future. Mark, your consulting agreement ends effective immediately. Your non-compete remains in force for 5 years. Your company equipment and access will need to be returned by end of day. You can't do this. I can. And I am. Just like you could cut my salary by 60% because you thought I had no options. The difference is, I'm offering you a choice." I slid the paper across the table. "A position as strategic advisor, part-time. The salary is, well, I think you'll find it familiar." Mark looked at the number. His jaw tightened. It was exactly 40% of his previous CEO salary, the same proportional cut he'd given me. "This is revenge." "This is business," I corrected. "The same business you've been conducting for years. The only difference is that now you're on the other side of the table. The meeting lasted another hour, but the outcome was never in doubt. By 10:30 a.m., Mark Grayson was no longer CEO of the company he'd founded. By noon, his parking spot had been reassigned. I spent the rest of the day in one-on-ones with the remaining leadership team, assessing who would stay and who would go. Most would stay. They were good people trapped in a bad system. Mark's inner circle, the ones who'd enabled his worst impulses, would be gone by Friday. The real work began immediately. While Mark sat in the lobby waiting for security to escort him to clear out his office, I called an all-hands meeting. The entire company gathered in our main conference room, faces mixing confusion, fear, and curiosity. "I know this morning has been shocking," I began, standing where Mark had stood just weeks ago announcing my humiliation. "But I want to be transparent about what happens next. Grayson and Holt is under new ownership, mine, and things are going to change." I laid out my vision, restoring the salaries that had been cut, rehiring the talent we'd lost, focusing on sustainable growth instead of flashy pivots. The room began to relax, then to hope. "What about our equity?" asked David from engineering, one of the few who'd survived Mark's AI disaster. "All employee equity grants will be honored and accelerated. You've earned it." The relief in the room was palpable. As for the executive team, I looked directly at Mark's inner circle, the VP of operations who'd laughed when my salary was cut, the sales director who'd called me Mark's pet CFO behind my back, the HR manager who'd prepared my demotion paperwork with a smile. "You'll each meet with me individually today. We'll discuss your futures." By 3 p.m., 4 of Mark's 5 key lieutenants had submitted resignations. The fifth, our CTO, made a compelling case for staying. He'd opposed the AI pivot, had advocated for employees during the cuts. He could stay, with conditions. The sweetest meeting was with Karen, Mark's former assistant. She knocked tentatively on what was now my office door. Ms. Carter." "Still Emily," I assured her. "Come in." She sat nervously. "Am I being let go?" "Why would you think that?" "I was Mark's assistant. I processed the paperwork for what he did to you." I studied her. Karen was young, maybe 26, stuck in a bad position with a worse boss. "Did you have a choice?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I needed the job. My mom's medical bills." "Then you understand what it's like to be trapped by circumstances. The question is, what did you do with the information you had?" She reached into her bag, pulling out a flash drive. "I documented everything, every questionable deal, every hidden meeting, every time he asked me to doctor meeting minutes. I thought someday someone might need to know." I took the drive, feeling its weight. "Why didn't you come to me earlier? Would you have believed the assistant over the CEO?" She had a point. I plugged in the drive, scrolling through files. It was a goldmine, evidence I hadn't even known existed. "Karen, how would you like a promotion? I need an executive operations manager, someone detail-oriented, discreet, and absolutely loyal to the company, not to any individual." Her shock was genuine. "You're offering me a job? After everything?" "I'm offering you a chance to help build something better. Interested?" By end of day, the transformation was underway. I sent a company-wide email announcing the salary restorations, effective immediately. The boost in morale was instant and dramatic. Slack channels that had been dead for weeks suddenly buzzed with life, but there was still one piece of business to handle. At 5:47 p.m., exactly 1 month after I'd signed my humiliation, Mark returned to the building. Security had called. He was in the lobby, insisting he needed to speak with me. I had him sent up. He looked smaller somehow, standing in the doorway of what had been his office. His Brunello Cucinelli sneakers seemed ridiculous now, like a costume he was still wearing after the play had ended. "Emily." "Mark, you have 5 minutes." He entered slowly. Looking around the office he'd occupied for 8 years, I'd already removed his vanity wall. The photos with minor celebrities. The framed magazine covers featuring his face. I need you to reconsider the advisory position. Oh? The salary you're offering, you know I can't live on that. Not with the divorce, not with my obligations. I leaned back in his former chair, studying him. Can't, or won't, because I lived on it. So did Sarah when you pushed her out. So did dozens of employees you decided were expendable. That was different. How? I let the question hang. Explain to me how it was different. He couldn't, because it wasn't different. It was exactly the same. Someone with power deciding someone without it should accept less. The position stands as offered, I continued. 40% of your previous salary, you can take it or leave it. This is how the economy works. Remember? His face flushed. You're enjoying this? I'm running a business. Nothing personal. Just like you taught me. Mark stood there for a long moment, his hand resting on the employment agreement. The strategic advisor position at 40% of his CEO salary, the same proportional cut he'd given me. The poetry of it wasn't lost on either of us. You know what the worst part is? He said finally, his voice hollow. I actually thought I was being generous, letting you keep your job. You were, I agreed. Very generous. You taught me everything I needed to know about how this world really works. Consider us even. He signed the contract with shaking hands. Not because he wanted to, but because he needed to. The divorce, the frozen assets, the lifestyle he couldn't maintain without income. All the leverage he'd once held over others now held him in its grip. When do I start? The words seemed to physically pain him. Monday, 9 a.m. sharp. You'll report to David, our new VP of Strategic Initiatives. He's excited to have your insights. David. The engineering manager Mark had publicly humiliated in 3 different all-hands meetings. I watched the final piece of Mark's pride crumble. As he turned to leave, I called out. Oh, and Mark? We're implementing a new performance review system. Completely transparent. Your compensation will be tied directly to measurable contributions. I'm sure someone with your experience will have no trouble adapting. He paused at the door but didn't turn around. You're not the Emily I hired. No, I agreed. I'm the Emily you created. The door closed with a soft click. I sat in the silence of my new office, watching the Austin skyline darken. Somewhere out there, Mark would be calling his lawyer, his friends, anyone who would listen to his story of betrayal. They'd sympathize, maybe even agree it was unfair. But fairness had never been part of his vocabulary when he held the power. My phone buzzed, a text from Lucas. Celebration drink, you've earned it. I considered it, then typed back, rain check, still have work to do. Because the truth was, revenge was just the beginning. Now came the hard part. Building the company Grayson and Holt should have been all along. A place where loyalty was rewarded, where salaries reflected value, where no one person could destroy lives on a whim. Over the next months, Mark showed up to work like clockwork. He sat in his modest cubicle, attended meetings where his former subordinates now gave him assignments, and submitted his reports on time. He did exactly what I'd done, survived on a fraction of his worth, smiled through the humiliation, and pretended it didn't burn. The difference was, I'd been planning my escape from day one. Mark was trapped by his own creation, the non-compete he'd insisted on, the reputation he'd burned through, the bridges he'd demolished on his way up. Sometimes I'd see him in the break room, making his coffee with the same mechanical movements I'd perfected during my own sentence. We'd nod at each other, professional and distant. He never asked for more money. He never complained about his assignments. He simply endured, one paycheck at a time, exactly as I had. Ms. Carter? Karen appeared at my door one afternoon, 6 months later. The board meeting is in 5 minutes. I thanked her and gathered my materials. As I walked to the boardroom, I passed Mark's cubicle. He was on the phone, probably with a recruiter, his voice low and desperate. 4.5 more years on his non-compete. 4.5 more years of eating the humility he'd served others so carelessly. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel anything at all. He was just another employee now, earning exactly what he'd decided people like him were worth, 40% of their value, with a smile expected on top. The boardroom was full of new faces, investors who believed in sustainable growth, partners who valued their people. A team that understood success meant lifting everyone up, not standing on their backs. "Let's begin," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. First quarter revenue is up 32%. Employee retention is at 94%. And our client satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in company history. The numbers told the story Mark never could. That treating people with dignity was profitable. That fair compensation created loyalty. That real leadership meant serving those you led, not feeding off them. He thought I was just the CFO, just another salary to cut, just another person to step on during his climb to the exit. Now he works for me. And believe me, I don't cut salaries. I just let people live with the value they assign to others. That's not revenge, that's justice. And in the corporate world, sometimes they're exactly the same thing. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Emily's position? I read every comment and can't wait to hear your perspective.